Hey friends, it's Jacob. If you're just starting out with watercolor or thinking about getting into it, you might find yourself being a little overwhelmed by the amount of options there are as far as what supplies you need. And you might even be hearing some conflicting information about the kind of paper, the kind of paint, brushes, all of that. So in today's video, I'm going to give you my complete supply list, everything that I use every time I go to paint. And hopefully it can help you make the right decision for your own painting setup. And if you want, you can even copy my own setup. So let's start with paper. So I paint on mostly Saunders Waterford cold press 100% cotton paper. They come in full-size sheets. So these are the size of the sheets. They're very big, as you can see. What I like to do is rip these down into 4 11 by 15 size sheets. And I usually buy them in sets of 5. So it gives me a good decent amount of 11 by 15 sheets to paint on. This is really good, high quality, 100% cotton paper. It's going to hold a lot of water and paint. It's going to keep things from moving around too much, but it's also going to let things fuzz out in that nice watercolor way. So this is what I mostly paint on, but there's a few other papers that I also will use from time to time. My other go-to is Arches. Arches cold pressed, 140 pound cotton paper. This is a block. So if you've never heard of a watercolor block, it's essentially just a bunch of sheets glued together. So you can kind of see right there, that black stuff is the glue. So you don't need to do anything to prepare the paper other than put the block on your table or whatever you're using to paint. Then when you're done with the painting, you can take a little knife, slide it into the slot at the top right there, and then you can just go around it with the knife and take the page off from the top. And then you have another page ready to go right underneath it. This is a really approachable way to start painting watercolor. If you don't want to deal with preparing a individual sheet, you can just paint right onto a block. You don't have to do anything to it. So a really approachable way to get into watercolor if you're just starting out. Now I also use sketchbooks. And I've made a video about this before, but I'll just go over it again. There's 2 sketchbooks that I prefer. Arches Travel Sketchbook. This has a kind of a long ratio. And I also really like these slightly smaller Winsor and Newton travel sketchbooks. They both use 100% cotton paper. They both hold water and paint really well. And they both have a nice little bit of grainy texture to them, which I really like. Speaking of paper, a lot of people when they're first starting out fall into the trap of trying to get the absolute cheapest version of everything, which is understandable. But especially with paper, you really don't want to get the cheapest stuff. The really cheap paper tends to be made of cellulose or have cellulose in it, which is not going to be able to hold the amount of water and pigment that you need to get a high quality painting. So anything that's 100% cotton, you should be good to go. You also want paper that's higher weight. So 140 pounds, somewhere in that range. Slightly heavier paper is going to be a little thicker and it's going to hold more water and pigment. So Arches is a really good middle of the road option. You can find it at just about any art supply store. I personally get all of my art supplies from Blick. You can also find it on Amazon. Saunders Waterford you can also get from Blick. Now for the paints that I like to use, I use a mix of Saunders Waterford and Winsor and Newton watercolor paints. And I also use white gouache. My preferred gouache is titanium white artist gouache. This tube, which is 59 milliliters, I've had it for like 3 years and it will probably last me another 3 at this rate. it goes on and on and on. A little gouache really does go a long way. By the way, I will have a link in the description where you can literally copy my exact setup. Just about all the supplies I'm showing you in this video you can buy for yourself. So use that link below and you'll actually help support the channel if you do so. So for the paint itself, I am slowly transitioning most of my palette to Daniel Smith, which is slightly higher quality than Winsor & Newton, but honestly, Winsor & Newton is a great brand, slightly more affordable, and they both have really good granulation. They both have a really nice smooth texture to them, and yeah, they respond really well. So Daniel Smith and Winsor & Newton, those are the paints that I use. Now, you gotta have a palette to put your paint on, right? So here are the two palettes that I use most often. First, I'll show you my big palette. That was the dry paint rolling around inside. I haven't used this one in a while. This is the Tom Lynch palette. It's got a lid on it, as you can see. We'll take the lid off. That's what it looks like. It's got a nice big mixing area. Really big containers for the paint itself. It's really nice to just have this big area to mix huge puddles of paint in. So you can also pick this up at Blick. They're very affordable, just a plastic palette. If you're looking for a slightly smaller, more compact option, I would recommend this travel palette from Blick. So it's a collapsible palette, and you can open it up, and that's what it looks like. It's got really nice mixing areas. It's got plenty of containers for the paint itself. And I've honestly been using this palette even for my studio paintings. I originally got it for plein air because it weighs absolutely nothing. It folds down super compact. You can fold it up and just slide it right into your backpack or whatever you're using when you travel. And the mixing areas are just big enough for me to be able to get that rich color that I like so much. So this is another really, really great option. I also have this one. It's a slightly different version of a travel palette. That's what it looks like. It's got 3 mixing areas. And yeah, this one works really well too. I don't actually know the brand of this one. I think I just found it on Amazon. They don't sell this one at Blick, but also a good option. This is I'm going to be showing you my plein air brush kit. This is just a little brush travel holder made by Etcher Labs. Rolls up like that. And it's got plenty of little slots for brushes in there, and I also have this little plastic knife in there for cutting those sheets out of my watercolor block. So if you're just starting out, you might think, oh, I need to get like 15 brushes, right? Not the case. These are the only 4 size brushes I almost ever use for every single painting I do, whether it's in the studio or on location. So these particular brushes I'm showing you are made by Winsor & Newton, and then this one is just a cheap flat brush that I got from somewhere. I'm honestly not sure. I think it's a Zen Art brush. It's a really good brush, actually. Zen Art is a good brand, good middle-of-the-road brand. I do recommend having at least 1 flat brush in your arsenal. It's super useful for painting right angle shapes, hard edges, things like buildings, rocks, things like that. Then I have this Winsor & Newton synthetic squirrel brush, number 6 size. It's a quill or mop style brush. You can see that it's got that nice fat tip on it, but it also comes to a really nice point. So this brush is great for covering a big area and also doing a little bit of detail work. The next smallest size I have is a number 10 synthetic sable round, also by Winsor & Newton. This brush comes to a really nice point when it's wet, so you can get those kind of sharp details in there. But it also has a nice flat edge to it for covering bigger area. It's a very versatile size, this brush. Number 10, Synthetic Sable Round. Also, I have this number 4 Synthetic Sable Pointed Round by Winsor & Newton. So this is what I use for really small detail work, mostly towards the end of my paintings. So these are my plein air brushes, but I have basically the exact same kinds of brushes in my studio setup. Another brand I really love is Escoda Perla. Those brushes are on the more expensive side, but they are absolutely amazing, and they will last a very long time. But Winsor & Newton is a really good middle of the road, slightly on the pricier side, but definitely still affordable. And just like I was saying with resisting the temptation to go cheap as possible with paper, the same holds true for brushes and paint. If you just get the absolute cheapest version of paper, brushes, and paint, you'll find very quickly that you're going to be extremely limited in the things that you can paint, and you're not going to be able to progress as far as you want. So if you're really serious about wanting to start learning watercolor, I would do yourself a favor and invest in some slightly better equipment, because it's just going to be so much easier for you, and you're not going to be frustrated and fighting against cheap equipment while you're learning. Also, the more expensive stuff does tend to last longer, so there's that too. So that's the core of what I use to paint with. The rest of the things I'm going to show you are just small miscellaneous items, but they're all equally important. So I just got a mechanical pencil. Any pencil will work for sketching, for doing the preliminary sketch before I actually go to start painting. I have a kneaded eraser, which, if you don't know what that is totally understandable. I also didn't know what that was until I started painting watercolor. It's an eraser that you can squish into a ball and roll around. It's like a really soft eraser. So what I use this for, is I'll roll it up like this, and then I will, once I have the sketch done, I like to sketch in really thick, dark lines so that I can see it when I paint over top of it. And I'll take this kneaded eraser and I'll roll over the pencil work, and that will pick up some of that excess graphite so that I don't get a bunch of smudging when I wet the paper down. Speaking of that, this is what I use to wet my paper down. I've seen artists use spray bottles. I used to do that. I've seen artists use brushes to wet the paper down. Both of those are fine, but I've found that if you use a sponge, you can really saturate the paper all the way through. And you can use the sponge to get a really nice, even wash of water over the paper. And by the way, I wet both sides of the paper down. I'll wet down the front, then I'll flip the paper over, wet down the other side, flip it back over again, squeeze out the sponge, wipe up the excess water. I've found that that gives me a really nice, smooth wetness throughout the paper. It prevents it from curling. I don't have to tape it down. Gives me more time to work wet into wet in the first stage. So, highly recommend using a sponge to wet your paper down. It's crazy how much of a difference it makes, actually. Learn that trick from Andy Evenson. Thanks, Andy. So, paper towels, just a roll of whatever kind of paper towels you want. I use this for controlling the wetness on my brush, wiping up paint if I make a mistake. That's the thing, you can correct mistakes to an extent in watercolor if you're quick enough with the paper towel. So always have paper towels at hand. Then I've got this just multi-purpose bucket. It's a 2.5 quart bucket. I'll fill it up most of the way with water when I'm painting. I find that this size bucket gives me enough water that I don't have to change it out in the middle of the painting. And the water will still stay mostly clear when I'm painting with it. You can get these at like Home Depot, Lowe's. I actually got this one at Blick, believe it or not, but you can find these just about anywhere. Any kind of plastic container that's about this size, you'll be fine. Now, as far as the surface that you paint on, if you've been oil painting or acrylic painting, anything like that, you're probably used to painting on an easel, which is more or less vertical. With watercolor, we tend to paint on more flat surfaces, maybe at a slight angle like this. So let me go grab the thing that I paint on. So I paint on this old vintage drafting board. My grandma's old drafting board. It sits at a slight incline, about like that. Very, very slight incline. It's got these little legs on it right there that kind of pop out like that. It's basically just a plank of wood that sits at an angle. You can also just paint on the flat surface of a table. I, for the longest time, painted that way. That's totally fine. One last thing. This little spray bottle is an absolute lifesaver. You can get these on Amazon. They're super, super cheap. I use this to keep the paper wet if I need to. I'll just give it a little spray like that. And that just preserves the wet into wet state longer if I need more time to work wet into wet and things are drying out too fast. I'll also use this to give little raindrop effects if I'm painting like a rainy or a foggy scene. I have a few videos where I show you how to do that. So there you have it. That's pretty much all you need to get started. So I hope you found this video helpful, and if you would like to buy the exact same supplies that I just showed you, I have a link in the description that's going to take you to a list that I've made on Blick, and you can get almost every single one of these items that I showed you today. I also have every single color of paint that I use in my palette. You can copy my entire palette setup if you want. Also, check out my Patreon, link is also in the description. I'm posting full-length, roughly 2-hour-long painting tutorials on there. And you can also download the full resolution JPEG and try to paint along for yourself. So, hopefully I'll see you over there. Alright friends, thanks for watching, happy painting, hopefully I'll see you on the next one.